I'm curious, when you did speak to your colleagues' class in high school, they apparently had some background and they knew something about civil rights history.
Yeah, they knew some civil rights.
So how did they react to you? I mean, was this like something from the distant past that, seems like maybe World War I would seem to me? Or how did they think you were a hero? How did they respond?
Well, one of the first questions they asked me was, what did your parents say? And I kept pointing out that I was 22, I didn't need anyone's permission to do this. But then they kept saying, well, weren't you scared? And I said, it's natural to be afraid. It will be unnatural not to be, to be unafraid. And then they said, how do you know you would have remained nonviolent had they struck you? And I said, some freedom riders were struck, but I was very lucky I was not. Some people, in fact, were very badly injured. I said, well, you never know. I mean, you try to prepare yourself so that you won't respond. You won't say anything or strike back. But that you never know until it happens what you're really going to do.
And part of the whole Breach of Peace Events Committee is to bring school teachers, like for example the committee, is we would love to see these kinds of dialogues and conversations happen again in the classroom, in some of the youth organizations, like LEAP, like Farnham House, like the Housing Authority. We already know Karen has assigned, I think you said Sheila, is going to be the point person, and we're hoping that one of the events will include Lula being able to come to the Housing Authority and speak with residents who may have been around at that time period, who have kids that are interested in knowing the background of their parents and their grandparents, and that is the kind of conversation that can be repeated in different venues in the city.
Well, they wanted to know things like, weren't you afraid you'd never get a job again? You got a prison record. Would that impact on your future?
Sure.
And I said, I didn't think I wanted to work for anyone who wouldn't hire me because I'd taken part in these demonstrations. But I admitted that it was a legitimate question.
Did your record get cleared or expunged, your prison record? Did it ever get cleared?
Well, I never asked for it to have my record expunged.
Okay.
In fact, now I consider it an honor
Yeah.
to have been, and even if they offered me a pardon or whatever the legal equivalent would be, I would say no.
Lula, just so many thoughts come to mind, just being in your presence and hearing you speak, from a film, from just your own story itself. But I'll just ask one specific question. You mentioned you're 22, but when you were 12, 13, 15, 16, what was Lula like before that? Were you a rebellious teenager? Were you always interested in politics? How do you think
Well, I was always interested in politics. Although my parents were not, but I was always interested in politics. But I did things from afar. I mean, I would read the paper about what was going on in African countries that were striving to be independent from European countries, and I would, root for the native people to have their independence. But I never, I had not done anything. Now, the first year when the Montgomery bus boycott happened, my father took children and me to down to Woolsey Hall for a rally in support of the Montgomery bus boycott. But I done no direct action. So my thinking had all been in my head about what I would do if such and such happened.
And you were around 14, 15 when that occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So take us from 54, 55 up to 61.
Okay, I went off to college in 56. And in college, as I said, I became chairperson of the NAACP. And I was always interested in civil rights and international affairs, but I had never actually done very much. Now, in '58, there was a strike at a nursing home on campus, and my roommates and I split. The two who were going to become doctors refused to support the strike, even though the workers were being paid horrible wages. Whereas my other roommate and I, we supported the strike. We collected food at the food co-op and gave it to strikers. We spelled them on the picket lines. When they had meetings, we would stand outside and picket.
For activities from afar.
Well, that's
I'm just using your.
well, a far step from getting arrested.
Yes, indeed.
And I had gone in 1959. I went on the Youth March for Integrated Schools. We took a bus from Chicago to Washington D.C. and we marched in front of the White House.
From
This
afar.
was mainly high school and college age people who took part in that demonstration. No, plus I was familiar with the South because even though I grew up in New Haven, we lived in Alabama. That's where I was born. And I went back once a year to visit relatives. So I was familiar with segregation. So this is not something strange. Well, it was strange. It was quite strange, but it was not anything unfamiliar to me. Yes?
Well, yeah, you're saying it's something that wasn't unfamiliar to you, and I'm wondering if even though you didn't experience segregation in New Haven.
Well, there was segregation, but not as much.
Yeah, and maybe not as obviously.
Not as obvious.
Yeah, could you maybe relate one or two experiences that you might have had in New Haven that you were driven you to be concerned about this?
Well, the fact that for most of the so-called good-paying jobs, you had to be white to get them. This is before there were lots of blacks in all walks of life. There was a lot of segregation. And I went to a school, my elementary school was predominantly black. So I was aware that it existed, and I noticed that blacks lived in certain neighborhoods, not in others.
Would you say that you experienced much in the way of racial discrimination while you were growing up here in New Haven? Yourself?
Not of overt
Yeah.
racism. And the contrast was during the school year when I was in school here in New Haven and going down south to Alabama to visit my relatives in the summer. There I had to go to separate water fountains and sit in the balcony of the movie theater, not try on clothing at stores. You had to buy them untested.
Do you remember what age you were when you first became conscious that that was what was going on in the South?
Well, we moved to New Haven when I was 7, and I was already aware that there was a difference between blacks and whites, and that there were certain things blacks weren't allowed to do, and that we had to go to certain places and stay out of others.
Can you talk a little bit about the present day and Barack Obama, the nomination? Does that show how far we've come? On the other hand, you hear interviews of people, clearly they're just not ready to vote for a black man for president. So how do you tie that into this era we're talking about?
And we're nowhere near the end of that journey. I'm not sure I would say we were at a specific spot, but we're nowhere near our goal. And as a matter of fact, although I plan to vote for Obama, he's not my perfect candidate. I preferred earlier in the campaign, I preferred Dennis Kucinich and and John Edwards. They were my choices ahead of Obama. But with Obama against McCain, I have to feel that I'm forced to vote for Obama.
A great moment for
Not a great
Latin
moment, a moment,
a moment.
a small moment.
Uh-huh.
Because as you said, there are a lot of people who admit that they won't vote for a black man, no matter who he is, or what he stands for. Well, it reminds me of a time when maybe I was more hopeful than I am at the present. Because I really thought when I was very young that things would change drastically and they would change quickly. And that turned out to be false. It's not the way things work. Well, that's, I suppose, true. But I think that in a young country like ours, a lot of people don't have a strong sense of history, so they don't even know what happened yesterday, not to speak of 40 years or 50 years ago, and I think it's important for people to know these things. I mean, they should know them, because you can't understand where you are now if you don't understand where you came from. And I know I was recently excited by my brother in Florida sending me an early census, the 1890 census, showing our great-grandparents. Because I think it's important to know. And they had 18 children, and it's important to know who these people are and to try to imagine what they lived through. I think that's important. But maybe that's why I taught history, too.
Yes.
Because it was a natural, it's very natural to fall into that.